Hello, I'm Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series where I, Tom Martin, lifelong journalist, having produced stories for ABC News, CBS News, CNN, covered the White House, and other assignments along the way, have a chance to ask author David Parker thoughts on history, economics, and politics, and put current events in a historical context, which is something we rarely have a chance to hear. David is the author of two great books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, and a third great book, a book of collected essays. They're all actually books of collected essays, but his latest book, Rome 476, will be available any day now. So I encourage you to look for all of them on Amazon, and I think you'll enjoy our conversation. Welcome, David. How are you today?
I'm fine, Tom.
Great to see you. Great to see you. I've been thinking, I've learned so much from your books. Again, as a journalist, we're so often focused on, the events of the day, and we rarely talk about any kind of historical context, but it's so important to, give such a deeper meaning to important events. And I was thinking about some of the recent events, that have been the headlines at the time that we're recording this episode, has to do with actions of President Biden, talking about maybe striking a new Mideast accord with Saudi Arabia, something that I think sounds pretty controversial, as well as the roles of other superpowers and so on. And I know that, you've focused on events over the centuries, really going back, 2,000 years or more. I'll just kind of throw this kind of rather broad question at you. I'm curious to what you'll say. Is what in your view, what should the role of the United States be in the world?
Well, if you would ask George Washington, he would say, "Get the hell out." What are we doing? We are Americans who have fled from all over the world. Put up a wall. The world is awful. They're fighting the fights they've been fighting for thousands of years. It's the same fights. Ukraine, we should help Ukraine, by the way, even though I'm talking this way, because the Putin is betting that we won't, and China's betting that we won't. And so we have to. And it means we have to get Europe also more involved, and even more Ukrainians. Maybe every man, woman, and child should be fighting in Ukraine. That would change things. But as a person who knows a little history and recognizes what's happening today as being not too different than what's happened for the last 3,000 years, I don't pay so much attention to world news. If you talk about Biden and Saudi Arabia, it's so hypocritical because there's such an awful government, awful leader. Why we are talking to them? Yeah, for geopolitical reasons. They have oil. Yes, we can talk with them for that, but it's grandstanding. It's Biden running for office is what it really is. When Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan, we're going to defend Taiwan, and everybody said don't go. But that was 2022. The Democrats were afraid of losing the House and the Senate. So she's going to Taiwan pretending she's a tough world-class leader. And Biden is talking to him. It's just, they're all running for office. These are politicians running for office. And what does in the news, all media is a business. People forget that. And they report what they think their viewers or listeners want to see or hear. It's pure business. And if that's what sells, that's what they're going to report, and that's what the politicians are going to say and do.
Well, let me ask you, I appreciate what you're saying. Let me ask you a follow-up question on that. I like to listen to a lot of lectures and classes on, entrepreneurship. And, a couple of people say, well, if you're an entrepreneur or a successful business owner, you have an obligation to, share your knowledge with people, just starting a business. And then other people say, no, you don't have an obligation. What do you mean by who is to say what kind of obligation we have? And certainly in some countries such as China, North Korea, and so on, there are very obvious human rights violations. And we pride ourselves on being, kind of the bastion of democracy in this nation. Sometimes we're forgetting that. I know you've said we don't teach that enough in our schools, perhaps, but do you think we have any? It sounds like you're saying we don't really have any obligation for any, human rights violations in other countries. It's not happening on our territory, so we have enough issues to work with, to manage right now. I was just curious if you think we have any kind of obligation regarding things like that.
There's an expression for that Henry Kissinger always says, realpolitik. Real, P-O-L-I-K, politic. It's a long established expression that you kind of, what's the word? You hold your, better edit this one, but when something makes you sick, you hold your throat or something like that, and you go through what you're doing. There's an expression for that. So
you hold your nose, so to speak.
Yeah, hold your nose. And
okay.
Go through, exactly. So we can't not deal with China. We can't just walk away from Russia. Or Saudi Arabia. But we don't have to do more than what we actually need to do to preserve world peace. So they have human rights violations, and the United States is known for not having human rights violations and being maybe the only decent country in the world. Just because the news reports some bad things that we do, that's life. I mean, they have to be stopped and corrected, but we do less than anybody else, and that's not in the news enough.
Yeah. Well, let me throw another situation at you. I'm just curious what your thoughts are. I don't know. I can't recall if you've written about this in one of your books, but Afghanistan. I have a friend, actually, he's reading your book right now, Chris Whipple. He wrote a few books about the White House, and he wrote a book recently about President Biden. And he said, well, one of the huge problems, of course, of his first 2 years was Afghanistan. Apparently, Donald Trump told the Taliban leaders over there, we will be pulling out. It's like all Americans year after year after year said, we don't want to be in Afghanistan, during the Obama administration and so on. And so finally someone said, okay, we're going to get out of Afghanistan. But apparently what has happened, and it was quite a mess getting out of that. I have some friends, former military people who just say the way that Joe Biden mentioned that was terrible, which I understand. But apparently they're in Afghanistan now. The Taliban leader says, well, girls should not go to school and they should wear their hijabs again and stuff like this. It's like, again, is that an example of something that we really shouldn't concern ourselves with that?
I suppose, because what can we do about it? And if bad ideas don't last forever, I understand there's rebel groups in Afghanistan now that are causing havoc for the Taliban, because not everybody agrees with the Taliban, and the women probably don't agree with the Taliban. That's half the population, and you can't stop them from watching the internet too often. I mean,
yeah. So they're aware of what's going on in the world. Yeah. Well, you raised an interesting point, or maybe I'm just interpreting what you're saying a little bit, but there have always been rebel movements rising up, and especially in the Middle East, that has quite such a historic legacy there in the different countries in the Middle East, and also it sounds like right now in Iran, another country that Joe Biden is making some moves to work with. There's a women's uprising, and again, I'm me, I listen to or watch CNN quite a lot. So in terms of where people are coming from, I'm aware of what you're saying. But they have a great international reporter, Christiane Amanpour, and she said, over several generations, women have been rising up. It's not like one day all the women decide to rise up, but it's a gradual movement. So maybe, I know that you take the long view. I mean, that's the beauty of your books. So maybe the women's rising up needs to be seen over several generations, and we can't expect it to be done overnight. and it should be done by the people in that country. We can't just rush in, like we have to so many countries rush in. It's like, we'll take care of this. It's not our history. It's not our battle. But I was just curious your thoughts about all that.
There was a famous, I think it's called George Kennan, ambassador to Russia. I think it's called the X paper. He says in the 50s and 60s or whenever he wrote that, do nothing. That the whole notion of this of communism is so wrong. It'll collapse by itself. We may have to wait 50 years. Just wait 50 years. Don't do anything. It'll collapse on its own. And over time, women in Iran will do something. They shot some young people, and every time they do something really horrendous, it just excites them more. But the real rough countries like all the Middle East and China, they just kill the opposition, and Russia, they just kill the opposition. But that's not a long run policy. That's not going to work, because everybody gets the message, and more people get afraid, and all of a sudden you reach a consensus that we shouldn't be doing this. I like the notion of consensus. We saw a mini consensus in this country for the election in 2016. All the polls showed Hillary was going to win by landslide, and on the day of the election, it didn't happen. Nobody told their friends they're going to vote for Donald Trump, but when they voted, there was a consensus for a moment. We don't know who Donald Trump is, and maybe they won't vote for him this time, but we don't know who he was, and we know the two parties are doing nothing and will do nothing, and there will be no change. We're just going to keep spending and not solving problems. Even if nobody verbalized it quite that clearly, there's a consensus moment, and the whole nation voted for Donald Trump without knowing who he was. So that kind of consensus will happen in other countries. Some moment will come, and somebody will take a leadership position and be prepared to protect themselves against the state going after them.
Yeah, they even had an attempted uprising in Russia not long ago against Vladimir Putin. I guess it didn't work out so well for the man who led that uprising, but anyway.
And he did nothing right away, waited a few weeks, and then killed him.
Right.
So he was, but enough people have to, that consensus, enough people have to say, we're living in a bad country, and we're not necessarily bad people.
Yeah.
When you talk about a country like Ukraine, we have to help them, but we have to know that their history is awful, that they have behaved badly. And even now, the president keeps firing top people because he doesn't know how to get rid of the corruption. Corruption is at the center of Ukrainian life. Democracy is at the center of American life, and corruption is the center of Ukrainian life. That's not a joke. They really don't know how to get rid of it. It's part. So we're defending a country that's I think it's trying to improve. That's why we're there also. This is a genuine moment in the lives. A lot of Ukrainians are really on the line, are fighting for something decent, for like the first time in their history. Probably they're fighting for something decent. We shouldn't walk away from them.
Right. Yeah. No. Good point. Well, let me just throw in for 1 minute, and then I'll shift gears a little bit, because I'd love to hear. We've been talking about the rest of the world outside our borders. I want to hear your thoughts about some challenges inside our borders. But for those watching and listening, I just want to remind you that this is an episode of A San Francisco Conservative. That is the title of author David Parker's second book. He's also the author of Income and Wealth, A San Francisco Conservative, and his new book is titled Rome 476, which all three of them are excellent collections of essays that are very, very thought-provoking. So I encourage you to pick them up. But so, David, you said that we have enough to concern ourselves with within our own borders. Where would you start? I mean, a lot of people are talking about bringing in a new president. So where would you start?
I'll give you another reason why we don't have to worry about the rest of the world. You were talking about entrepreneurism. Maybe we can show the rest of the world how to be entrepreneurial. We don't have to show them. Two of the most entrepreneurial people in the world are the Koreans and the Cubans. If North Korea fell, the North Koreans would be like the South Koreans. They can't wait to go into business. And, it's sad that Cuba became communist because they're very entrepreneurial people historically. And we should have, what's his name? The guy from Cuba.
Fidel Castro.
And Che Guevara. They should have been working in Nicaragua or Guatemala, those countries who have never done anything. If Cuba had stayed somehow free, Havana would be the financial capital of Latin America and not Miami.
Yeah.
That's how entrepreneurial the Cubans are. It's a real crime.
Well, they had their era, right? I mean, the beautiful architecture, and people were flying there for resorts and so on. And then Fidel Castro came in, and everything changed.
Yeah, they were practically part of our economy. Cuban, it's a natural. They were almost a state, better than Puerto Rico. So it's too bad that communism went there, and in North Korea, the Chinese just came in with 1 million soldiers, and we couldn't handle it. And General MacArthur was going to handle it, and Truman pulled him back. No, you're not. Real politics. We're just going to maintain the status quo.
Yeah.
And, so if that's how it is, then we should just make a minimum relationship with all these countries and not be involved in their life.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point, I think, to conclude our discussion here. I just want to thank everybody for joining us for this episode of A San Francisco Conservative. And again, I will encourage you to visit David Parker's website, davidparkeressays.com. You can also find his books on Amazon, of course, Income and Wealth, A San Francisco Conservative, and his newest book, Rome 476. So anything you want to add in closing, David?
No, you said it at the beginning that I give historical examples, and they're the same. So I'm not personally really interested in politics. I don't know what Joe Biden is doing, and I just assume he's running for office. And I like to say that journalism or media is a business, and they're reporting from the perspective of the moment. You could say they're reporting from what they think their listeners and viewers want to hear, or else they'll lose their subscribers. They're out of business. So don't look at the media for your news.
You're not encouraging us to be independent thinkers, are you?
Yeah, just get on a plane, go over there and talk to the people.
You have another great point there. This is true. No, we definitely want to encourage our independent thought. So great. Okay, well, thanks, David. I enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
Good, me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.